When it comes to the January 6th Capitol riot, Mike Pence is more than willing to talk about his experiences that day, so long as he's able to promote his book in the process. If you've got television cameras or newspaper pages to fill, even better. The one group Pence won't talk to about Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election, the January 6th committee. He closed the door on that less than a week ago in a TV interview, of course.
I never stood in the way of senior members of my team cooperating with the committee and testifying. But Congress has no right to my testimony.
You're closing the door on that entirely.
I'm closing the door on that.
But what about Justice Department prosecutors? That's the question tonight following a new report from the New York Times that DOJ investigators are looking to question the former vice president as part of its January 6th investigation. The Times reports, quote, Mr. Pence, according to people familiar with his thinking, is open to considering the request, recognizing that the Justice Department's criminal investigation is different from the inquiry by the House January 6th committee, whose overtures he has flatly rejected. The discussions about questioning Mr. Pence are said to be in their early stages. Mr. Pence has not been subpoenaed, and the process could take months because Mr. Trump can seek to block or slow his testimony by trying to invoke executive privilege. Trump tried to invoke executive privilege to stop two of Pence's top aides from speaking to the Justice Department's grand jury. Didn't work, and both reportedly testified to the grand jury over the summer. Is their former boss next? And will Trump try to stand in the way of that testimony if Pence is indeed willing? Joining us now, Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General of the United States. Also with us is Glenn Kirschner, a former federal prosecutor. Both are MSNBC legal analysts. Thank you both for being here. Glenn, I'm starting with you. From a prosecutor's standpoint, what's the benefit of speaking to Pence, especially considering they've already spoken to his two top deputies?
Yeah, you want to get it right out of the horse's mouth. Let's remember, Pence is not only a fact witness to Donald Trump's pressure campaign, trying to get him to essentially violate the law, the Electoral Count Act. He's also a victim. And I have to say, Jonathan, that when I heard Mike Pence say he was closing the door on testifying to the January 6th committee, I found that to be deeply unpatriotic. I mean, he puts these revelations in his book. He profits off revealing information about Donald Trump, trying to pressure him to overturn the election's results. But when it comes to testifying before a congressional committee that is trying to enact legislation to prevent another insurrection in the future, he closes the door on that. As I say, I find that to be deeply unpatriotic.
You know, I see you nodding your head there, Neil, and I want you to respond to what Glenn said, but what do you make of the former vice president refusing to talk to the January 6th committee while on his book tour?
Exactly. So there's two investigations, Jonathan, about January 6th. One is done by Congress and one's done by the Justice Department. The Justice Department one is a criminal investigation, meaning jail time is possible there. The congressional one is one about uncovering the facts. Pence has said in that interview you showed last week that he's refusing to talk to Congress, which is, I agree with Glenn entirely, it's unpatriotic, but I'd also say it's frankly disqualifying that this guy thinks he can be president of the United States and is afraid to go and tell the truth before Congress. And he's going in for, his aides have gone and had to testify, but he's been hiding in the shadows and is continuing to hide thus far. So I'm glad to see the Justice Department is finally calling him on this and saying, look, you're like the central figure in a lot of this. You were there at all the key times. I mean, you're kind of the Forrest Gump of January 6th. And so you've got to go and tell us what happened. And look, I think that there's a chance that Trump might cooperate, that Pence will cooperate without a subpoena, because, if you think about it, if an angry mob tried to kill you or me, we'd probably have a few things to say to the investigators. And so, there's that possibility. But I think the more likely thing is Trump will try, because he always does, any legal maneuver to block his testimony, asserting executive privilege. And as you say, that's exactly the maneuver that failed before, and it'll fail again.
To Neil's point, Glenn, he was there, meaning Mike Pence was there, and the committee hearings revealed just how much danger Pence himself was in on January 6th. Take a look.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more.
Glenn, what charges might prosecutors be looking at for Trump or his circle for January 6th?
Oh, goodness. Where to begin? So inciting an insurrection, potentially still a seditious conspiracy. I think there's still some evidence that needs to be developed on that front. Obviously, obstructing an official proceeding, the electoral college count, the vote certification. He was unlawfully pressuring a high government official, Mike Pence, urging him to violate the law. So, and Mike Pence, Jonathan, he can close the door on testifying to the January 6th committee. He can even close the door on a voluntary interview with federal prosecutors. Federal prosecutors can't compel him to come in for a voluntary interview. You know what he can't close the door on? A federal grand jury subpoena. Let him try to close that door, and I suspect special counsel Jack Smith will kick that door wide open, perhaps even off the hinges, and Mike Pence will end up inside a federal grand jury.
Neil, one more question for you, but on a almost different subject. It's about the jury deliberations that are underway in the Oath Keepers seditious conspiracy case. It was an ambitious charge. Do you think the verdict will impact what DOJ decides to do about future January 6 charges?
That one's to Glenn, I think, not to me.
I have. Well, thank you, Neil. I appreciate that.
He's been watching the trial.
Weeks. Thank you. I've spent 7 weeks.
Well, that's right. How did I forget that?
Trial. All good. And I will tell you, no case is a sure thing. But I watched the prosecutors, the two lead prosecutors, Catherine Rakosi and Jeff Netzler, former colleagues of mine, try really an expert case. And I think as often as we're criticizing decisions of the Department of Justice, we need to give them props because the American people were extremely well represented in this prosecution. I suspect that things are going to fall the prosecution's way, and we're going to begin to start to see guilty verdicts come out of that jury. It's still going to take some time. It was a long trial, and there are 5 defendants on trial. And I think if the seditious conspiracy charges stick, you will see that sort of embolden the prosecution to continue to move forward. You may even see defendants who are pending trial in seditious conspiracy cases. There are more Oath Keepers to be tried. The Proud Boys will be tried for seditious conspiracy. You might see some of those dominoes start to fall, some more guilty pleas entered, even perhaps with cooperation. And I think that will keep the ball rolling in the direction of justice.
Neil, I owe you one because of my faulty memory. I owe you one. Neil Katyal, Glenn Kirschner, thank you both very much for coming back to The Last Word.